Few could have imagined that one of the most mysterious discoveries of modern medicine wouldn't come from a lab or a microscope, but from a hospital bed. In the heart of an intensive care unit surrounded by machines and protocols, Dr. Penny Sartori began noticing a pattern she couldn't ignore. Patients who were in a state of clinical death, without a pulse, without brain activity, came back to life and told such amazing things that even skeptical doctors reconsidered their beliefs regarding the existence of the afterlife. These weren't vague feelings or metaphors. The patients described events that took place around them while they were unconscious, conversations between doctors, the appearance of medical equipment, or precise visual details from other rooms, all confirmed later by staff. The consistency of these accounts across age, background, and belief system was impossible to dismiss. Sartori began collecting the stories, cross-referencing them with medical records and clinical data. What she found didn't fit any known neurological or physiological explanation. And that was only the beginning. Penny Sartori is a British nurse who spent more than 20 years working in intensive care units, those liminal spaces where life and death are separated by machines, monitors, and a few fragile breaths. Her role was clinical, precise, focused on physical survival. But over time, something began to disturb that clinical routine. Again and again, patients who had been declared unconscious or even clinically dead for short periods returned with stories that defied all logic. They spoke of floating above their bodies, watching the medical team trying to resuscitate them. They described what was said in the room, who stood where, what equipment was used, all verified later as astonishingly accurate. Some said they traveled down a tunnel. Others saw a glowing light. Many spoke with deceased relatives, and nearly all said one thing that shook Penny to her core: "I didn't want to come back." At first, Sartori was skeptical. She believed in science, in evidence, and yet the consistency of these accounts, the calm in their voices, the peace in their eyes, kept gnawing at her. Were these just hallucinations, dreams, coincidences, or something more? Rather than dismiss these reports, Penny decided to investigate. Not anecdotally, not philosophically, but scientifically. She began a 5-year clinical research study at the very place where she worked, the intensive care unit. There, she systematically documented near-death experiences in patients who had survived critical conditions. Her method was rigorous. She cross-referenced medical charts, monitored timings, conducted interviews with patients, and consulted with neurologists and anesthetists. Every story had to be verified and corroborated as much as possible. She wasn't collecting rumors, she was building a body of data. Sartori hoped the findings would support the common medical assumption that these experiences were brain-based illusions triggered by medication, oxygen deprivation, or trauma. But the data told a different story. Over time, she realized that many patients had clear, detailed memories of moments, biologically speaking, they should have had none. Their brains were shut down, their bodies were unresponsive, and yet, they remembered. More than that, they described profound emotional transformations, a loss of fear of death, a new appreciation for life, and often a belief that consciousness continues after the body stops. What began as doubt turned into discovery. Penny Sartori didn't set out to prove that life after death exists, but after 5 years of listening, documenting, and comparing stories across age, culture, and belief systems, she was faced with a conclusion that even she hadn't expected. These experiences weren't random, they weren't easily explained, and they certainly weren't meaningless. They pointed toward a mystery far deeper than she had imagined, and her journey was only just beginning. As Penny Sartori listened to story after story from patients who had come close to death, a clear and powerful pattern began to emerge. It didn't matter who they were, old or young, religious or atheist, male or female, from different cultural backgrounds. The core elements of their experiences were nearly identical. They all described an intense feeling of peace, the sensation of leaving the body, effortlessly, almost instantly. Many said they could see themselves lying motionless, surrounded by medical staff, watching from above. Some could recall exact phrases doctors or nurses had spoken, things that were later verified word for word. One man described how he saw a doctor holding a green marker during his resuscitation while he was technically unconscious. No one had spoken about the marker to him. But hospital staff confirmed it. It was true. Others spoke of a tunnel, not a literal one, perhaps, but a transition. A pathway. At the end of it, a light. Warm. Welcoming. Not blinding, not frightening, but filled with love. And time after time, people said they met someone. Sometimes it was a deceased family member, a parent, a friend. Sometimes it was someone they hadn't thought about in years. Yet they appeared, radiating calm and kindness. A few described being told, "It's not your time," before being pulled back into their bodies. Many mentioned a strange yet unmistakable boundary, a point they felt they couldn't cross. A few said they wanted to go further, but weren't allowed. And nearly all of them said the same thing when they came back: "I didn't want to return." These weren't the ramblings of confused minds. Penny noted that most of the patients were lucid, calm, and coherent. Their experiences were not dreamlike. In fact, many said they felt more awake and aware than they had ever felt in their entire lives. Sartori was particularly struck by how the experiences had long-lasting effects. People became more compassionate, less materialistic. They developed a stronger sense of purpose. And the biggest change of all, they no longer feared death. It didn't matter whether the person was religious or not. Even atheists described nearly identical journeys, some of them later questioning their own beliefs. What was also fascinating was that these were not religious visions. People didn't describe seeing specific gods or angels based on their faith. The images were universal: light, warmth, presence, peace. And that's exactly what made them so difficult to dismiss. Could these experiences simply be the hallucinations of a dying brain? Penny Sartori looked at the neurological data, consulted with specialists, and studied the oxygen levels and brain activity during these events. And time after time, the science didn't add up. These moments occurred when the brain should have been inactive, when the person was in a deep coma, or even moments after being declared clinically dead. And yet, they remembered. It was this consistency, this clarity, this calm certainty that began to convince Penny Sartori that these were not hallucinations or coping mechanisms. They were witness accounts. From the edge. And once you've heard enough of them, she said, you stop asking if they're real. You start asking what they mean. As Penny Sartori's research progressed, one question remained at the heart of it all. Could all of these experiences, floating above the body, seeing a bright light, meeting deceased loved ones, simply be the result of a dying brain? A final burst of neural activity, perhaps? A protective hallucination caused by trauma, medication, or lack of oxygen? She approached this question not as a believer, but as a trained clinician. Over 5 years, she examined hundreds of near-death experience cases, diving deep into medical charts, brain scans, and real-time clinical data. She consulted neurologists, cardiologists, anesthesiologists. She reviewed every hypothesis, and the evidence led her somewhere unexpected. In the majority of the cases she documented, patients reported vivid, coherent, highly structured experiences. But they did so during moments when, by all medical standards, the brain should not have been capable of such experiences at all. These were not dreams. These were not side effects of anesthesia. Many patients had been clinically dead, no heartbeat, no measurable brain activity, no oxygen supply, when their NDEs occurred. Some of the most profound reports came after the heart had already stopped, and the EEG showed no signs of cortical function. That means no awareness, no sensory input, no memory formation. And yet, these individuals later described detailed events, sights, sounds, emotions, that they could not have accessed through their physical senses. In one verified case, a man accurately described the exact steps of his own resuscitation. He remembered the look on the nurse's face. He knew what equipment had been used, even though he had been unconscious for several minutes and had no prior medical knowledge. Penny Sartori knew this wasn't just unusual. It was impossible to explain using our current models of brain function. She studied the theory that these visions were simply hallucinations triggered by lack of oxygen. But many patients showed no signs of hypoxia. Others were not on sedatives or hallucinogenic drugs. Some were in calm, controlled conditions. And yet, they all described the same universal themes: separation from the body, profound peace, encounters with light or beings, and the overwhelming sense of being home. So what was really going on? Even some of the most skeptical neurologists reviewing Sartori's research admitted that these cases challenge everything we know about consciousness. How can someone have vivid perceptions when their brain has effectively shut down? Where is the line between body and mind? Over time, Sartori arrived at a conclusion that shook her personally and professionally. Consciousness may not be created by the brain. Instead, it might exist independently, something that the brain merely receives or filters, like a radio picking up a signal. And when the brain ceases to function, that signal doesn't die, it continues. If this is true, then death is not the end of consciousness, it is the release of it. Penny Sartori wasn't the first to suggest this. Other researchers, like Pim van Lommel, Bruce Grayson, and Sam Parnia, have come to similar conclusions. But Sartori's data came from the heart of the hospital, under the strictest medical conditions. Her work didn't rely on belief or speculation. It relied on evidence. And that evidence pointed towards something that modern medicine is only beginning to grasp: that the mind, the soul, whatever name you choose, might not die when the body does. And if that's true, then perhaps death is not an end at all. Perhaps it's only a doorway. After years of research, hundreds of interviews, and countless hours spent by the bedsides of the dying, Penny Sartori didn't emerge from her work with a bold claim to convert the world. She didn't declare that she had found proof of the afterlife. She didn't preach religion or push an agenda. What she did was much simpler, and perhaps much more profound. She wrote a book, The Wisdom of Near-Death Experiences, and in it, she asked the world to do one thing. Listen, Sartori's message isn't about belief, it's about relieving fear. The fear of dying, which quietly shapes how so many of us live. She believes that fear of death is one of the greatest, most unspoken burdens people carry, and that lifting it can transform lives. She said it clearly in an interview. If you had heard what I've heard, if you had seen what I've seen, you would live differently. Throughout her research, Sartori noticed something extraordinary. People who had experienced NDEs, whether they were religious, spiritual, agnostic, or even devout atheists, returned changed. They spoke of peace, clarity, and a deep knowing that consciousness continues. Some could not explain what they had experienced, but they no longer feared death. Many said they now feared not living fully more than dying. And that's what Sartori wants people to understand, not just scientists or doctors, but all of us. She has become a leading voice in the field of near-death studies. She's been featured on BBC, interviewed in The Telegraph, spoken at major medical and spiritual conferences, and collaborated with other well-respected researchers like Bruce Grayson and Pim van Lommel. Her work is cited by academics and clinicians around the world. But she never stopped being a nurse. She never stopped being someone who cared deeply about the comfort of others. In her talks, Sartori repeats one truth she's heard from hundreds of patients who've come back from the brink. There is no fear. There is only love. It doesn't matter who they were. It doesn't matter whether they expected to see anything. The moment they stepped out of their bodies, they described the same overwhelming presence, a warmth, a light, a feeling of being completely accepted. She also stresses that these experiences are not the product of trauma, nor are they wishful thinking. Many of the patients had no prior beliefs in the afterlife. Some were even skeptical of anything spiritual. And yet, what they experienced defied their own understanding. Sartori's mission today is twofold. First, to educate the medical community. She advocates for better spiritual care in hospitals and hospices, especially for those nearing death. She wants nurses, doctors, and therapists to recognize the signs of NDEs, to respond with empathy, and to support rather than dismiss these life-changing experiences. Second, she wants to offer comfort to families and caregivers, to help people facing death, whether their own or a loved one's, with greater peace and understanding. Her message is not sensational. It's not even shocking. It's gentle. It's human. And it might be exactly what we need to hear in a world so often afraid to talk about death. Because if even a small part of what Penny Sartori has documented is true, if consciousness survives the moment the heart stops, then death is not a wall. It's a doorway. And maybe, just maybe, what waits on the other side is not something to fear, but something to embrace. Thanks to people like Penny Sartori, we are beginning to see death differently. Not as darkness, but as a transition. She doesn't preach, she doesn't speculate. She simply shares what she has witnessed through the eyes of hundreds of patients. And in those eyes, she says, she did not see fear. She saw peace, she saw light, and perhaps, just perhaps, a quiet understanding that beyond the final breath, there is not emptiness, but reunion. For Sartori, life after death is not a matter of belief. It is a matter of experience, deep, personal, and often undeniable. Her work gives voice to those who have come back from the edge, carrying a message not of fear, but of comfort. She reminds us that death may not be the end we've imagined for so long, but a continuation of something greater. And because of her, we've been given a rare opportunity to listen to those who have been beyond and returned with hope. Do you believe in life after death? Write in the comments. Recently, some interesting videos were released on my channel. I strongly advise you to watch them. Please don't forget to like this video if you liked it. See you soon.